Eric Schmitt, who is talking to me from your offices, your law office in St. Louis. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
All right, thanks for joining me today. We're going to preview a couple of things as you get ready to go into the session as you and I speak here in just over another week. First, we want to maybe do a little bit of review on an issue that you carried in the previous session earlier this year, a bill that passed and has become law that enables or will enable some patients in Missouri to be treated using hemp oil. What is the process to get that moving forward? Where does that stand right now?
Well, as you know, Mike, we passed a law last year that would allow patients and their families access to CBD oil, which is another option for families who are suffering or dealing with intractable epilepsy. So that the typical course of medications have failed, they have not been effective in controlling epilepsy. We wanted to make sure that those families had an opportunity to try something else and something that's shown a lot of hope for families in different states. And Missouri was proud to say kind of on the forefront of that effort in the 2014 legislative session. When that bill was passed unanimously in the Senate, then overwhelmingly in the House, it was signed by the governor. At that point, the Department of Agriculture, which is primarily in charge of administering the program, along with the Department of Health, as far as the applications from patients, were charged with the duty of promulgating rules so that the law would, be effectuated. They've done that. They issued emergency rules, actually, which I was pleased that they did earlier in the fall. And that comment period now is winding down, but I think they've issued some rules and provided a framework now for the two licensees, which will ultimately be awarded to grow the hemp plant and then extract the CBD oil, which just for refresh everyone's recollection, this is a oil that's extracted from the plant, which has been genetically modified so that THC levels are so low you can't get high from it, but the CBD levels, which have the therapeutic effect, are high enough that they've been effective. So they'll extract that oil all in the same place. So they'll grow it, have that facility on site, and then make that CBD oil available for patients in seeking that access across the state. And so they've received, we checked last week, they've received about a dozen applications, which is a good thing. And they'll be sifting through a merit system that they've created in that application process to award two licensees as they work through this process. And so my hope is that in 2015 there'll be some significant progress with those licenses being awarded. They'll start to grow, and then the product will be available for Missourians.
Are you satisfied with how quickly that has moved along so far?
Yeah, I've been. Yes, I have been. Once the legislation was filed, I did start to have conversations with those departments and encourage them to move quickly because there are patients that are seeking this and want it as soon as possible. The wheels of the bureaucratic channels don't spin as quickly as I think all of us would like sometimes. But I think they're doing their best right now to try to get these applications approved. But we'll be watching because again, at the end of the day, this is about patient access, and you're dealing with a very vulnerable population of folks that, quite frankly, their lives are in jeopardy because of the seizures, the constant seizures that they have. And so these are people that have tried other things and they haven't worked, and they're having seizures every day. So time is of the essence. We'll continue to push them along, but I am heartened by the fact that I think those two departments have taken that to heart and are trying to move forward quickly.
This is an issue that was personal for you because of your son. If you don't mind us asking, how's he doing?
He's doing okay. It's an ever-changing journey. Stephen is 10 now. He was diagnosed very early with a genetic condition at 5 months and tuberous sclerosis. And one of the things that typically happens with patients who have that diagnosis is they have epilepsy because he has tubers in different parts of his body, including his brain, and different organs, including his brain. And that has caused him challenges throughout his life. I mean, he's nonverbal. He suffers from seizures every day, and scary ones where he's not breathing. And so we're living with that still to this day. And he's tried a number of medications, all of which have not effectively controlled it. But he's a real blessing. a unique opportunity for me to share that story on the Senate floor so that people really had an understanding of what these families are dealing with every day. It just so happens that I am a state senator and could share that with my colleagues. But the daily struggles that these families have, the uncertainty, the fear, quite honestly, that they live with and we live with, that there's a 4-hour seizure or something worse than that. And so to give a voice to people out there who are dealing with this condition is something that I'm very humbled by. And so I'm very hopeful that this therapy can be out there for people to utilize and hopefully bring control to seizures, because it's just such a scary thing. So Stephen's doing okay, suffering from a lot of the challenges that I talked about on the Senate floor still, but we had a good Christmas. He has two younger sisters, Sophia and Olivia, 6 and 4. That he's surrounded by a lot of love. So we had a good Christmas, and looking forward to a good New Year.
Well, Senator, we're glad to hear that. As you touched on the Senate floor, not just about your son, but patients dealing with these conditions in general, the hemp oil offers hope. It may not work for everyone, right? And part of the point of this is that people need the chance to try.
They need to try, and you know what? Missourians shouldn't have to. And we have friends who've done this, and we know people, and people that we didn't know before we took on this legislation that have reached out to us since, that have packed up their entire families and moved to Colorado to access it. And people shouldn't have to do that. They shouldn't have to leave the support network, which is critical for these families that they have here in our state, their jobs, their homes, their families, to go to an entire another state just to access something that should be legal here. And that's what we sought out to do. And those stories from those families who came to testify were very powerful. And I think people understand that this was a significant issue to the people who were affected by it, because their lives are disrupted by having to move to another state, and all they're trying to do is try to get a better outcome for their kids.
One more thought, I think, on that topic, and that is there was some, I don't know if concern's the right word, I didn't hear a lot of thoughts expressed that maybe that would be sort of a stepping off point for some further legalization, whether it be of other products from marijuana, something like that. Do you see whether more towards the legalization end or more towards the medical use end, that there is more that needs to be done, more that needs to come off of that bill in this coming session or future sessions?
Well, I think there's going to be probably something on the ballot from what I guess nothing's ensured to be on the ballot, but there's a lot of discussion about those topics being on the ballot in 2016. What we tried to focus on in 2014 was the efficacy and the hope that this provided on a product that you couldn't get high on. So a lot of the concerns that some have about some of those other issues, we really tried to focus in on what this really was and what the benefits are for people, and that we were setting up a framework that's a very conservative framework, quite frankly. Of all the states that have done this, I think we moved forward in a very conservative fashion to ensure that that this was being done the right way, that it would be available, but that it was highly regulated. And we did that in an effort to try to appease all the concerns, because as you remember, this was filed relatively late in session. It was filed on March 1st, or April 1st, I'm sorry, and passed on May 1st, which is kind of breakneck speed in the legislature, especially for an issue like this that was brand new and something that had a lot of those other concerns that some people have. But I think the power of the story, the power of people's desire to really have access to something else that might work for their kids carried the day, and I'm just thankful for all those families that came up and testified in support.
It was very remarkable how that bill managed to pass, and as we look ahead to the coming session, one that may have some a similar momentum going in is your legislation dealing with municipal courts. There's certainly been a lot of attention about that, even before you start thinking about the discussions in St. Louis and in Ferguson. That is no doubt maybe the major driver behind that now, but you also have the attention coming from the state auditor's office. You now have the suits that have been filed by the Attorney General. Where do you see yourself starting, really, I assume, hitting the ground running with that issue? Yeah,
we filed it. It was the first bill that I pre-filed, Senate Bill 5, to try to get it assigned early. Hopefully to my committee. I chair the Committee on Economic Development and Local Government. The first one usually gets most of the attention, but the local government piece of it is relevant. Excuse me, but I think that where we're at, I think we've come in this. This is a unique issue for me in the sense that it is really spans the political spectrum. This is a situation where you have conservatives and liberals agreeing that we have a problem here. We have a situation where, quite frankly, too many municipalities are too reliant on traffic tickets and fines to fund bloated government. And we've set up a system now that is being abused. We have in St. Louis County, I'll just use St. Louis County as an example right now, we have 81 municipal courts. That's 61 more than the next largest circuit in the whole state. And many circuits, as you know, are multiple counties in other parts of the state. We have 14 municipalities in St. Louis County alone where the traffic tickets and fines is their single biggest source of revenue. You have about 50% of the revenue from traffic tickets coming from the St. Louis metro area, which has about 22% of the population. So clearly there's a problem, but it's not unique to St. Louis. I mean, the law, after all, Max Creek law, which sets the cap at no more than 30% of your budget can come from traffic tickets and fines, is a small rural community. It was a notorious speed trap. We've got, cities all across the state that are collecting more than the 30% they're supposed to, which is why the auditor is taking this on. They're not handing that money over to the state, the excess, which they should be doing, which is why the Attorney General has filed suit. But I think my legislation goes one step further, which is to say that we need a lower amount. 30% is too high. You've seen these abuses in municipalities. It's propping up bloated government. And the way this is playing out, Mike, is a real injustice in the sense that we have modern-day debtor prisons. You have people going to jail for a traffic ticket fine that they didn't pay for. Life happens. They missed a court date. A bench warrant's issued, and they're in prison. There's a better way for us to do this. If people are interacting with their courts, and as somebody that cares about the Constitution, it's creating a breakdown of trust between people in their government and people in the court system. We ought to care about that because the courts are supposed to be there to protect people's constitutional rights. You've got in St. Louis County again, 40% of those municipal courts weren't allowing kids in the courtroom. People having to make a decision between paying a fine or paying a babysitter has created a real issue. And so I'm very hopeful that we're going to have a lot of momentum coming into this legislative session to do something about it and to right a wrong here. And it's time we start calling these things out. The good example is I grew up in North St. Louis County. My district is not in North County, but I grew up there. My parents still live there. My grandmother lives actually in St. Anne, which is a municipality by the airport. When St. Anne had the largest mall in the country and all the revenue, sales tax revenue that flowed from that mall, Northwest Plaza, you didn't see cops having a speed trap on Highway 70. That mall is now demolished. And what do we have? We have a speed trap on Highway 70. So people viscerally understand that this is a problem. They know that there are abuses taking place, and government doesn't exist to extract more and more from people and to create these elaborate traffic ticket schemes. So we're going to do something about it, I hope, and call this out for what it is. And again, it's pretty bipartisan support right now.
You, as you said, pre-filed that bill, and you've had the better part of a month for it to be looked over. I'm sure there have been some discussions. Maybe some other lawmakers have bent your ear about perhaps changes or even expansions on what you've got. How are those conversations going so far?
Good. I mean, part of the reason the bill that I pre-filed just dealt with the cap, going from 30% to 10%. But you have this whole other arena of reform. Well, two. I would put them in two kind of buckets. One would be, this failure to appear issue where somebody doesn't show up. Well, the court currently has a mechanism by way of a contempt hearing to deal with that. But these failure to appears are an easy way for municipalities to get another layer of fines. And it's a $120 speeding ticket turns into an $800 fine. I mean, I think that's a problem. So we have some reform there, and also how the courts interact with people, like allowing kids open courts, allowing kids in the courtroom, some of the things like that, which I think we'll take a look at. But quite frankly, the Supreme Court and local rules might be able to deal with those as well. But the second is the enforcement mechanism, and I'm very open to any ideas that people have. Legislators and citizens have reached out to me telling their own story, which again, why this is unique. There's been a lot of people that have come forward and contacted me in my office about some of the things that they've seen in this system. Again, in the myriad of municipal courts that we have, some of the abuses that have taken place. But right now, if you're over 30%, it's a self-reporting mechanism. That might be something we want to look at right now. And there's two consequences right now if you're over 30% of your budget coming from these traffic tickets. One is you're supposed to lose jurisdiction. I think I know what that means. I think it means you lose jurisdiction over hearing traffic tickets in that municipal court, and that's one of the bases of the Attorney General's cause of action that's recently been filed. And then also, you're supposed to lose jurisdiction. You're also supposed to turn the excess over to the state, and it's supposed to go into the school fund. That's not happening. So I think we should tighten up those enforcement mechanisms and possibly look at some other ones to really add some teeth to this law.
Let me come at this from the other angle on for the county, or for the municipalities that have been doing this. If that revenue stream for them, the excess money, and how they've been using that is taken away. Now, I don't think they're going to fold like Max Creek did, but what do they do, and how much of it is that a concern for you at this point?
Well, I think we have to start with the question of, is this just? Is this the way that municipal governments ought to exist, or are they being propped up? Are they supplanting? Are they replacing revenue from somewhere else, like lost sales tax revenue or declining property taxes? Instead of having the courage to go to voters and asking them to support something, are we using these mechanisms, these speed traps, so that city managers don't have to make tough decisions? And I would argue that yes, that is happening, and that's wrong. And so there may be some really tough decisions that need to be made. But I think our job as legislators is to sort of call out things that are happening that are unjust, and I believe in my heart that there's a lot of unjustness that's happening with this. And then let the solutions flow from there. I have no doubt that there's going to be city managers in some of these cities that are extracting more and more from citizens through traffic tickets that aren't going to like this bill. But I wasn't elected to represent, a bunch of city managers who want to avoid making tough decisions. I'm elected to represent people who I believe, by and large, see the injustice, whether they've been ensnared in this or not. They know that what's happening is wrong, and I think this is a right that, or wrong that we can right here. And again, a unique scenario where you have conservative groups and liberal groups supporting it, and a bipartisan delegation of people that want to see something done with this.
Obviously, as we mentioned, this issue has been tied to Ferguson and the issues that have been raised out of Ferguson. Do you see that as good or bad, or do you care if it's considered a quote-unquote Ferguson issue given the other bills that are out there that deal with other issues related to Ferguson, or does this need to be thought of in its own light?
Well, I think this is a statewide issue. I can tell you that there's a lot of cities out there. The city of Randolph in Missouri collects 3/4 of its in western Missouri collects 3/4 of its revenue from traffic tickets and fines. There's a lot, and I intend to bring to light the real abusers in this, and they're not just limited to St. Louis County. So I think, and again, the law, after all, is named after Max Creek. It's not named after a municipality in St. Louis County. But I do think there's probably a higher density of abuses in the St. Louis County by some of the facts that I pointed out earlier. But it's not limited to St. Louis County. I do think that as it relates to Ferguson, there's probably a discussion we need to have about the breakdown in trust that some people feel exists between people and their government. If this is the main course of interaction, these speed traps that some people are experiencing between the government and also, most importantly, the court system, which is supposed to be there to protect their constitutional rights, not be part of this abuse that's happening. And so I think if we can right that, if we can get under control the size and scope of these municipal governments, that is a root issue about how people interact with their court system, because they're being hailed into court for a lot of these, again, schemes that are being devised just to extract more and more. So I think it's relevant on that perspective, but I think it has a broad application, and it's something that that legislators across the state ought to be concerned about, because their citizens, not just in St. Louis County, are being ensnared in this in a lot of these schemes too. And there's a lot of by and large, municipalities out there who are, doing the right thing. You don't see this level of abuse, but there are some out there that this bill is intended to address, and they're not limited to St. Louis County. So I think it's a statewide issue. And again, there's just a lot of energy here. I think this is something that people have felt and have seen for a long time. It's probably there's more of a focus because of recent events of the summer. And some of the statistics that maybe people were not aware of, which I think has maybe heightened the sense of urgency.
I do want to ask you before we let you go, the last time I got a chance to speak to you was after the the Joint Oversight Committee had its first hearing, as it's preparing to dig into particularly to that. Can you tell me, since that first meeting, what discussions have been going on? When do you plan to meet again?
Sure. Yeah, and one final point on the municipal court reform, too. I think it's important to point out, and the law enforcement folks that I have talked to, and I've had a good relationship with law enforcement during my Senate career, the law enforcement officers that I've talked to, they did not, this is not why they went into the police academy, okay? They didn't come into the police academy to meet a budget for a city manager. And all you need to know about this issue is that there are cities out there that are estimating more and budgeting more revenue for the next budget year for traffic tickets and fines. And so I think if those police officers had more time to spend in the community policing, which is why they went into that line of work, to make communities a better place, build those relationships with people on the beat, that's a much better use of their time than, again, being part of this system that's really, I find to be abusive. But on your question about the committee, we had a hearing a couple weeks ago, and I think we defined two main issues that we want to look at under that oversight committee. One is how the money was spent in the response to the Ferguson unrest. How that money was spent, because the governor wanted to call us into a special session for a particular appropriation. It was pointed out by the appropriations chairman, Kurt Schaefer, that the money was already appropriated for these things, and he sort of backed away from that call. But in that discussion about a special session, it was very clear we wanted to understand where the millions of dollars had already been spent. We haven't gotten a lot of answers to that, so this committee, I think, can be a place where we figure out, by way of accounting, where the money has been spent. That's a core, I think, principle of that committee. The other thing is, and I want to understand this, the governor called for a state of emergency, specifically to have the National Guard available in the event there was more rioting or civil unrest or law breaking that was wherever it was going to happen in the St. Louis metro area. There were there were National Guardsmen in Clayton, in downtown, but there were none on the streets of Ferguson that night. I want to understand what the decision-making process for that was. I think it is a tragedy that business owners in Ferguson, who were assured that they would be protected, and the National Guard was specifically there for that purpose, why they were not on the streets of Ferguson that first night when the non-indictment came down. I think the governor has to answer that question, and I think that people in his administration need to answer. People of our state deserve an answer to that, and to understand why, because I just don't understand why the National Guard was called, why there were as many as 1,500 in a gymnasium waiting for the governor to send them to Ferguson when one of our communities was burning. So I don't view this as anything more than our legislative check on the executive branch and asking these really important questions. I don't have any preconceived notions necessarily. I just think that it's appropriate for us to have these hearings to find out where the money was spent, and also to understand why the National Guard was not in Ferguson that fateful night. So I think that's reasonable.
All right. Anything that you've learned? So
since that hearing, because of the holidays, we have not met. I know that in the early part of January, we're going to be looking at what documents we'd like to see, and then from that point, I think we'll call particular witnesses in front of this very bipartisan committee.
All right, I think that's good. I appreciate the time, and you said you and your family had a good Christmas. Glad to hear that. I hope you have a happy New Year, and we appreciate it. We'll be talking to you again here a little over a week, if not before.
Yep. I hope you have a good New Year too. Hope you had a good Christmas, and yeah, we'll see you soon enough, right? In a couple weeks.
That's right. Senator Eric Schmitt, thank you very much.
Take care.
This is Mike Lear for Missourinet.